Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV 9.
Good morning. Welcome to Ethical Perspectives in the News. My name is Pete Welch, and I'm the moderator for this morning's show. This morning, we'd like to visit about a recent local election and vote that was held here in Cedar Rapids. And we're kind of going to do a post-election talk about the ethics that went on in the casino campaign, the methods, the thoughts on the advertising, and do a little bit of after the race analysis and how we think that impacted the community. With us first this morning, we've got Todd Dorman, who's a columnist with the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
And next we have Renee Schulte, who lives here in Cedar Rapids and is a former state representative. Good morning, Renee.
Good morning.
And last but certainly not least is Steve Sovereign, who's a former state senator and also has done a good bit of political analysis in the media here and about in the Cedar Rapids, Eastern Iowa area. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
It used to be that it was said that all's fair in love and war. Do we now add political campaigns and votes for casinos to that list? What do you think?
Well, I think you probably could say that, although I don't think you could even say all's fair, because the kind of advertising that succeeds today is anything but fair, truly. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but the truth is pretty hard to sort out anymore for the average citizen, because pretty much the person who's running or the person who's telling the story is telling their own story without too much investigation behind it.
Would that be a little bit, when you talk about the type of reporting that's done, is that like in any news media where it's a function of they sell the dramatic stuff? That's what sells papers in numbers on a TV show, as opposed to truthful reporting?
Well, I think it may be a little different in the sense that I think this problem is due to a lack of reporting to a great extent. 20 years ago, the public got most of their information about candidates and ballot issues from investigative reporting. Today, they get about 20% of their information from investigative reporting and from the media because of a number of reasons. One is, of course, the social media, the politicians going directly to the consumer, if you will, rather than having somebody question them closely and really look into what they're saying.
Todd, you wrote a number of columns on the topics. What type of investigating did you do, media sources or things?
Well, it was different than a lot of campaigns in that the time frame was really short. I mean, we're talking about basically a 6 to 8 week campaign, and the amount of charges and countercharges and things that were flying were coming fast and furious. It was sometimes difficult to sort of verify everything. I focused a lot of what I wrote on the question of whether a casino would be a good thing or a detriment to the community, to Linn County. I wrote some about, the trading back and forth, the personality-based stuff. But, I mean, to one token, as Steve was saying, that you have the news media needs to, check that sort of thing. Part of the problem is, though, anymore, I mean, we saw this in the presidential election, that you'll have fact-checking and you'll have people writing stuff and saying, well, that's not, an accusation isn't true. But that doesn't mean the accusation goes away. The accusation just keeps coming. They basically just ignore the fact that it's untrue. I mean, we don't have truth laws, I guess. So we can report till we're blue in the face that something's inaccurate, but it's up to the campaigns and the candidates to stop using the inaccuracies, and anymore they just don't do it.
Renee, how did you perceive all the last-second advertising and what was going on?
Well, you had a lot of untruths on both sides. And so for me, I was just pretty sick of the whole campaign by the time it was over, and not so much of a side. I saw lots of half-truths at best. You're talking on the vote yes side about jobs, but we all know, and the research shows, that you can lose jobs in a community just as you can gain them when you put in casinos. Nobody wanted to talk about that. And on the no side, there are some good things that can come to a community with casino, and they only wanted to focus on everything terrible and everything bad, and that's not true either. I don't think the casino necessarily is the savior of the community, but I don't think it's necessarily the detriment of the community, and you couldn't get that balanced perspective anywhere, really, because everybody was making it either be the best thing ever or the worst thing ever at the same time, which was very frustrating for most of us that are voters trying to figure out what you want to do.
And you know, I think, Pete, it was an example of what consultants do with campaigns today. Because
Would that be called spinning?
well, it would be, yes. And what happens is, and particularly when you have an outside of the city consultant, as did the No campaign, and then eventually the Yes campaign did something similar, but they know that you have to create a devil. It's not about the facts of the matter. It's about creating a person who has evil motive, even if they don't. They have to create that person, and frankly, they did that to Steve Gray. They pointed out, and they wanted you to get to dislike him, and if you disliked him, you disliked the issue. Eventually, the Yes campaign did the same thing to Dan Keel, but it was quite a bit later, after the No campaign was pretty successful in raising these concerns, but ultimately, I think maybe that backlashed.
Now, there are well-developed laws on political campaigns, and both you and Renee have been involved in those, and those are a little more well-formed for purposes of the public. And in that case, it's the individual that stands forward first, and then later on it's what they may do or vote. In this case, it was the principle of the casino first, and the individuals were second.
But you see, they tried to reverse that.
They tried to.
That's the point, yeah.
They went past the issue,
Yes.
and when they didn't get traction on the issue, then you go and crucify the people behind.
Right.
Well, and part of that is because, I mean, Iowans are sort of comfortable with gambling. A lot of Iowans are. So to sort of make the campaign about whether we should have gambling or shouldn't have gambling, I mean, it's like a sort of an issue that's been settled. So then you have to go to the secondary campaign where it's which set of rich guys do you dislike? Do you like the local rich guys, or do you like the rich guys from
The guy down the road?
The rich guys from Washington County. I mean, it's just that's what it sort of turned into toward the end. And then we had sort of the late entry, Dan Keel, saying that he would build a water park if the casino referendum failed, which was it's sort of the kind of plot twist you don't see every day.
Well, wasn't that rather blatant in the advertising? The full-page ad says, vote no, casino, yes, water park. It was on the same page. It was a full page, I believe.
Well, and at the time that happened, it was the Friday before the election, and it sort of was unclear why that. I couldn't figure out whether they thought that there was a small pool of undecided voters that they could turn at the end, or what their strategy was. But then when you see an outcome that's 61-39, I guess the polling they were seeing showed that they probably thought that they needed some sort of Hail Mary to sort of change a game that they were already losing.
And that margin, Todd, was 22%. If you go back to the 10-year before, where it was defeated by 6, you had the 22 in favor, the change of the other side. That's a 28%. That's a major move in, Steve, I mean, in all of this area. That's, even in 10 years, that's a major change of mind.
That certainly surprised me. I didn't expect that to happen, not that I had any particular insight into it, but I think most people expected it to be close. I don't know the reason why it wasn't, except for the fact that there could have been some backlash to the elements of the Say No campaign or the Casino No campaign. I'm not sure of that, but I thought, for instance, at first, what a clever move to put an alternative up. But I think in a way that they just, the voters didn't buy it. They thought that was just a little too slick.
It would have been clever if it had happened, in the end of January, if he had come out with that plan. I mean, I think it was the lateness of the hour that sort of made people think, that seems sort of fishy. And I think maybe I'm trying to figure out why the margin was so wide, because I was surprised too. I think part of it is that, this is what I heard from a lot of voters, is that they looked around at other communities that have gambling, Dubuque in particular, and said, geez, good things are going on there. It seems like gambling's a part of that. Maybe we've missed out on that and should change our mind about it. Maybe gambling would be a good idea here. That was sort of the sentiment. And these were folks that had voted no in 2003 who said, maybe it's maybe we were wrong, or maybe we should give this another try.
Renee, your sense on that?
There seems to be another piece of it too, that the folks that were for the Yes campaign are from Cedar Rapids, and it's about Cedar Rapids. And there were a lot of folks that were just insulted when it came down to people from out of Cedar Rapids telling us what to do with our money, or taking our money from us. That whole conversation that came down. And so when that last minute effort to bring in a water park, it just made it feel like that there's this outside entity, and it was like us against them. And if you've ever talked about, siblings, you guys might fight like cats and dogs, but as soon as somebody else outside your family fights against you, then you two bond together and go after it. That's about like Cedar Rapids. I mean, when you start feeling like the outside world was against Cedar Rapids, I could see Cedar Rapids pulling together, because I heard a lot of people that said they weren't even going to vote, but they were just offended by the idea that somebody else would come in and tell Cedar Rapids what they could and couldn't do.
And a major difference this time was both the county and the city council were on board.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big difference.
That's a big difference.
Now, Steve, I could put you on the spot here. You were on the original gaming commission.
Yes.
When it was originally appointed by Governor Branstad many years ago. Is the margin of that victory going to make an impression on the gaming commission, do you think, in the next step?
Traditionally, they've taken that into consideration. I think it is a factor, and maybe a significant factor. I'm not sure. I think it's a tough road, simply because the state issues licenses to facilities so close, and their viability depends a lot on the decision in Cedar Rapids. And believe me, the political pressure is going to be huge. So it seems to me that's a close question.
And it's virtually a certainty that some amount of business from the nearby casinos is going to be affected if there is granted this license. And that's
I think it's just absolutely logical. It just has to happen that way. There aren't that many gambling dollars. I know back when I was on the commission, we were trying to decide between Dubuque and Waterloo at that time, that they were thinking that was pretty close. And now we're pushing that quite a bit in this particular instance.
And virtually for anybody outside of this local area to get here, they've got to drive by another casino.
A very good point I hadn't thought of, but you're right. In terms of travel, they're going to go buy one to get here. So as a result, you've got to really convince them to do so.
Is it practical to think that there can be ethical standards that we should apply to campaigns like this?
I wish that we could. Money is a huge challenge. You've probably heard me say this before. Political campaigns are much about that. Back in 1990, when I ran for Congress, I went to D.C., and we were told, that is we being Democratic candidates all over the country, as well as the Republicans across the hall, you raise the money here, you do the polling here to find out what people want to hear, then you tell them what they want to hear, and you get elected. I mean, that's the mantra that goes with political campaigns today, and it's worse today than it has been in the past. Now, you can't, there's no truth police, but we're losing what truth police we had by the drawing back of the investigative media if we had a solid one to begin with.
Well, and one of the problems with this campaign was, the ethics should be truth, but there's so much research out there related to gambling. I mean, just reams and reams of research, a lot of it paid for by one side or the other. Yeah. And it's really easy to sort of go out there and pick and choose statistics from that body of research to prove various points. Can you prove that those arguments are untrue? It's really difficult because everybody's got their own set of numbers, and the numbers, digging through to figure out which of those are valid and what the research methods are of all of the studies that were cited would take a bigger newsroom than probably the Gazette had at its largest circulation time. But that's part of the problem with this issue. It's gambling. You've got it's a boom. It creates jobs. You've got lots of research out there that shows that. You've got lots of research that shows it's going to make your town into a crime-ridden cesspool. I mean, that's just
take your pick.
No matter. I mean, it's just no matter where you go. It's and it's one study is cited, and then you dig a little deeper. Oh, this was paid for by the the American Gaming Association. I mean, it's difficult.
I know it was interesting. I'm not sure I believe that the most accurate economic prognosticator for Cedar Rapids was going to be the lady behind the butcher shop counter selling sausage.
The meat lady.
The story on that one was that the crew came to town to go ahead and and film a short ad for them, and they were hungry. On their first day in town, they went across, and this gal was talking it up so much, they said, why don't you put her in a commercial? And they did. So, Renee, what about, were we tired? Was Cedar Rapids just plain tired of too much advertising through the caucuses, the political campaigns, and everything else? Seems like we've really been targeted with a lot of this in the last year and a half.
We really have, and I know, I mean, this is just on my social media sites, when you saw people flipping over to the next campaign right after the end of November, and some of our key volunteers on the Republican side became involved in this campaign for the casino, and then started blasting that on our Facebook pages and blasting that on everything. I mean, I heard a lot of complaints about that, and so a lot of folks just turned that stuff off at this point. And yes, I mean, obviously they were a little more motivated because they had really good turnout for a special election, which is much higher than they've had in the past. So it definitely struck a chord with people to draw them out to vote. And from that perspective, that's a good thing. But I'm not necessarily sure that they knew exactly what they were voting on, because what Todd just referenced about all the research out there going so many directions, it's hard to say if it's good or if it's bad. And so, but people clearly wanted to be heard, and they did a good job as a campaign of spurring people on to get to that voting booth.
And Steve, like anything else, we keep dealing with different media and increased speed of message, whereas years ago we'd find out something was done in Washington because President Reagan was talking to Tip O'Neill, and 10 days later we'd hear about it. Now it's relatively so much faster and more instantaneous.
It's so immediate. You're absolutely right, Pete. And the social media, as Renee has referred to, creates that kind of a situation. The 47% that we talked, I mean, there's always a camera. Yeah. And so not only do you have to be guarded or truthful to everybody, but because you know that somebody's going to pick out some bit somewhere.
Well, and the question is also, when do you do the reporting that you hope to make the impact? I mean, in this election, you had 18,000, almost 20,000 absentee ballots cast over the course of several weeks before the election. I mean, in 2003, the last gambling election, I think there were about 4,500 cast. So, a good, let's see, how many people voted in the election? In this election, was it about about 60,000? Yeah. So a third of the electorate had voted, well before Election Day. So, a lot of times traditionally, a newspaper will be like, well, like our endorsement came out the Sunday before the vote. We have a big package of coverage. You hit it really hard the last week before. Well, I mean, a pretty high percentage of the electorate had already voted by then.
And didn't they actually, they being the campaigns themselves, were very much aware of that trend, because immediately, I mean, early on, we were inundated with very slick direct mail stuff, all of which had a call for
get your absentee ballot.
Get your absentee ballot. That's right. So
now the other interesting dynamic is we don't know whether the onslaught, created a difference between the early filed absentee ballots and the late filed absentee ballots, or the early voters that went to the auditor's office, because they don't tabulate that. They put it all in one number.
Right.
But I do remember that before, the west side had said no, the east side had said no, and the west side had said yes to the gambling issue. Did we see that dynamic or that figure?
I think only 4 precincts in the county voted no.
So it was.
And 2 of them were in Mount Vernon, and there was, I forget, there might have been 1 in the Cedar Rapids.
They were around Mount Vernon. I remember that. Yeah.
So that's.
What do we have to look forward to in the future, do you think, on media? How do these untruths, I believe this station even stopped running an actual TV advertisement. What was that issue?
It was.
But it was media policing itself.
It was the ad that claimed that the city was going to give the casino investors the land.
Oh. Okay. And there had been no. So there can be some self-policing to this, just by.
Right, and that's tough. Well, and in a general election, there's nothing the television station can do about ads for a candidate. You can't pull those. I mean, that's just the federal rules. Now, for committees, things like this, the station can make the decision.
I think the really huge challenge was pointed out by Todd earlier, and that is, there are fact checkers and what have you, but the lie is told, and let's call it what it is, a political lie in many instances told again and again and again, and there seems to be no conscience on the part of those that are telling them. These are generally sort of headhunter kind of consultants. Their only success is a win no matter. And the candidates have to fight against that sort of thing. The campaigns in Cedar Rapids should have fought more against what was really a community divisive move on the part of and again, I would say initially by the Say No Casino group. So I think the campaigns themselves have got to face and look the consultants in the eye who just want to win and say, we want to win that we're proud of. And that needs to happen at all levels.
I think a little bit of that, Renee, your point about the possible mis-strategy of the vote no people and then coming up with such a big margin between the inside the community and outside the community.
And it's hard when you don't have a real face. If you're a real candidate, like when I ran for office, I mean, I'm responsible for what I put on television, and I have to live with that. But when you're a collective group of people, and you've paid a consultant, it's easier to blame somebody else for whatever that lie is. You're not the person that agreed to that ad, and so you can blame it on whoever. And I think just that watering down in these group things really make it a whole lot easier just to continue with the lie. And then once it catches on and you see poll numbers start ticking up, they just keep it going, whether it's true or not, because they know it's making a difference in driving people their way.
Difference being that the consultant packs up his bag, walks on down the road to the next campaign for whoever else is willing to employ them. You have to live in the community, breathe in the community, and live with the results.
That's right.
Exactly.
Well, as elected representatives of this community, that was always that way for you.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do we do? We're about six months before this decision ever gets to the Gaming Commission. Is that about right, Steve?
That's what I understand.
Okay. And looking forward, we're going to have peace and quiet now over the airwaves. What's our next controversy, Todd?
Well, there's some city elections coming up. I'm not sure what those will amount to. Yeah, they're preparing their application for the Gaming Commission. The Gaming Commission it'll be interesting to see what the Gaming Commission does, considering that you've got Warren County south of Des Moines. There's some interest in putting a casino there. In the past, it seems like the Gaming Commission has basically said, okay, if there are multiple entities that want to look at casinos, we would like to take all those applications at the same time and make a decision on multiple applications. So maybe it may be that we have to wait and see what Warren County does until this process winds through. It could be a good year or more before we know whether they're going to grant a license.
And our representative, right now, it's Greg Cipher from our community. He's off at the end of June.
I'm not sure about that.
I believe he's off at the end of June.
That is correct.
Yeah. And we don't know whether another replacement that Branstad would pick would be from this community if we've got an application in. So.
Yeah, and of course the commission itself being made up, I believe, still of 5 people, that they're to represent the whole state. And now, I'm sure that people would prefer, just like on the DOT, they'd like to have their representative there. But in theory and in practice, generally speaking, it's been to represent the entire state and not carry the water for any particular area.
Now, one of the other things that's always troublesome in managing to do this is that everything is so very short fused. And you first need to see what somebody's putting out there in the media, and it's going to be a day or two of play or replay before you figure out what it means, form your response, film, and do everything. So that makes all of this much harder, doesn't it?
It does.
To try and do the ethics and
It really
and come
does.
back.
If you're and what do you do if you're the candidate that's getting attacked and it's a fault and a lie? The louder you scream, the more guilty you look. I mean, because that's the way we're taught, in an issue where people are involved in a fight or an accusation, usually the person screaming the loudest is the guiltiest party. And so as a person being attacked, you have to take that into consideration as well. Even if it's not true, how do you respond, and how do you make sure that people don't look like, because then all of a sudden if you respond big and bold, people are like, oh, what did they say? And then it's all there where they can go back and rehear it another 100 times. Whereas sometimes you have to let some stuff pass. And so it's this weighing game of, you know it's not true, but then how do you respond as the person being targeted, or in vice versa? And so you're right, that is, it's not easy. So once that lie is told, if you shine the spotlight on it and do the fact check thing like we love so much, when that comes out, then everybody goes, what did they say about so-and-so? And go look it up. And
Well,
it
and a
just
lot of-
keeps going.
Yeah, and a lot of times the accusation is simple and the explanation to
yeah.
refute
Isn't.
it is
Oh, yeah,
complicated.
never.
Point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah,
So
never.
that's
That makes it worse.
difficult.
Well, the strength of the denial, I mean, you can look at Lance Armstrong and
Yeah.
sit there and even your fact checkers these days they've checked those, and some of those appear not to be totally on the up and up.
Well, and what was interesting about this campaign too is that a lot of the the accusation against the Vote Yes people was, we want more disclosure. We want you to tell us more about your, and as they told us more, that basically just provided fodder for more attacks. I mean, it's like they told us the location. Oh, it's city-owned land. It's a giveaway. I mean, so that was sort of the interesting. They were actually feeding the attacks against themselves by handing out more, by disclosing more information about their plan.
Even the ones attacking had the tables turned on them when they were saying, where are you getting your funding
Yep.
Right.
to
That's
fight
exactly
this?
right.
And
that
funding was coming
and
from
that
other
was their-
gambling
it was
interests.
probably their Achilles heel in the end.
Yeah. And I think it's a bit of a double standard when you're saying you want to fight the gambling, but yet you're accepting it from another place other than Cedar Rapids.
Double standards in politics?
Oh,
No.
No, that couldn't be. And Steve, the next stage is going to not be fought really out in the public purview, is it?
Well,
It's going to be to
it
the
isn't.
commission.
It shouldn't be. That's right. It's now based on the arguments regarding the facts and the studies. I think the commission will probably commission at least a couple of studies. Of course, the folks in Riverside and the folks in Waterloo will come in with their studies. Cedar Rapids will come in with theirs. So it's going to be a battle of the experts now.
Okay,
most
we got
probably.
about a minute left. Any last thoughts? It's going to be an interesting next few months.
In terms of the casino itself, I think it's going to be a lull. And then it's going to light up as they get toward the commission.
Renee, last comment?
Well, it'll be interesting to see if they do any grassroots kind of support efforts for this. And there may be folks called upon to contact their gaming officials to give them their perspective on this. So you may not see it's quite as public, but I bet you there's still some action going on.
And I'll bet you're going to have some more column space for this issue as it develops further, right, Todd?
Sure. Everybody knows I love to write about casinos. So,
Personal research. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for joining me this morning. And on behalf of the Religious Council of Linn County and Cedar Rapids, Iowa, thank you for joining us this morning, and go out and make our community a better place to live, grow, and raise children. Thank you much.